Hello, everyone. Luciano Oliveira Lawyers. Today is January the 1st. That's going to be our last live stream of the month. And as usual, participants have a priority to suggest topics of interest for us to discuss live here in our channel. So welcome, everyone. And let's get started by commenting on some of our recent consultations here at the firm. We've been seeing an increase in concerning real estate transactions in the northeast of the country. More specifically in the state of Ceará, there are some developers that are selling the so-called villas to foreign citizens. But unfortunately, these villas are not being delivered. People are not getting possession. People are not getting the titles. Okay, that's in the state of Ceará. And litigation has been started by some of these buyers. In the city of Salvador, Bahia, unfortunately, we have identified a few transactions related to attempted fraud to creditors. And the scheme is basically you're going to buy a property, from a seller. There is a due diligence on the seller on the property, and apparently there is nothing wrong with the seller. However, once you start the negotiations and you're drafting the contract agreement, you realize that the seller is not actually the person on the paper, but it is someone else, right? So the seller on paper is actually a straw man or a straw woman or a straw person. And this person is basically, the owner of record. Well, this person is like basically assigned by the real owner, because the real owner is either entangled in debt litigation or criminal activities, right? So there has been the case for a couple of transactions we trying to vet recently, and of course they didn't go through, okay? So just keep aware, there is a lot of concerning real estate transactions or concerning properties and sellers in the northeast of the country. Of course, that's not exclusive to the northeast of Brazil. We are basically sharing our recent experience with you guys as usual. Let's see the questions we have over here. Okay, so the question here is like, can I have a child in Brazil in order to secure the permanent residency? Yes, this is a topic of interest to many of our consultation clients. They are going to have a child, and because of the digital nomad, type of mentality nowadays, people understand that they have options when it comes to having a child. And some people are going to opt to have a child in Brazil, not only because they are considering a second residency or even citizenship, but also because they want their child to have better options in the future. Okay, so initially there would be a strategy sought by people from developing countries. But nowadays, interestingly, we are seeing that from people in developed countries, more specifically the United States, right? People from the United States, they have a concern regarding taxation. Taxation is pretty harsh in the West, in a sense that you're going to be taxed on your global income, not on your U.S. income. So that means you can be pretty much taxed anywhere you are. So if you have income, like in Europe, in Brazil, in Antarctica, or even in Mars, like you're still going to pay taxes on those incomes. So, for instance, Brazil, although it also has the global taxation perspective. Hello, everyone. Luciano Oliveira, Oliveira Lawyers. Today is January the 31st, and we are here in our last live stream of January 2024. As usual, we're going to be discussing topics of interest of those participating in our live stream. So don't be shy. Let us know your topics of interest. Okay? Let me check here if we are indeed live. I see here on YouTube, yes, we are live. It looks like our live stream software is also outputting image and sound correctly. So there you go. Okay. So we were talking about, taxation, right? And how Brazil compares to the United States. Basically, both countries are going to be taxing on a global basis, meaning that if you are a resident in Brazil, you're going to be taxed on your income from anywhere. It could be in the US, it could be in Antarctica, it could be in Europe. Like there are no exceptions unless there is a treaty, a tax treaty, right? The good thing is, like, Brazil offers a switch, meaning that if you are a legal resident in Brazil, but if you decide to spend time outside of the country in the future, there is a way for you to kind of turn off the global taxation approach by Brazil. And you basically need to file the so-called Declaração de Saída Definitiva, or in English, that would be the tax exit declaration, which basically says you're going to leave Brazil, you're going to live somewhere else, and therefore you don't want to pay taxes in Brazil because you are already paying taxes somewhere else, right? So that's a really nice switch, a tax switch that Brazil offers currently. And this is not available, for instance, in the United States. So if you're in the United States, there is no such turn-off switch, right? Like, I mean, it doesn't matter if you live in Europe for 20 years or for 50 years, or if you live in Brazil, Uncle Sam is still after your taxes, no matter how long you've been abroad. Okay, so that's a pretty, really nice, offer from Brazil. Check here. I don't see any questions yet. Let me see if we are. All right. There is a question here from Copper Giraffe. Is the digital nomad visa only available for a maximum of 2 years? So there is no settled decision on how long you can renew the digital nomad visa. We have news of applicants achieving a second renewal. Okay, if you take a look at the regulation, like there is a specific regulation for the digital nomad visa, and such a regulation says that additional regulation is going to be eventually be to decide on the renewal. And guess what? There is no such regulation addressing the renewal. So it's being pretty much to the Brazilian Polícia Federal to decide if they are going to renew or not. And it looks like there is no settled approach to the renewal. And our recommendation is, listen, let's consider that the renewal is on the table, and it's worth a shot, particularly if you don't have a plan B. Our recommendation is you should apply, And just like I said, there are other applicants getting the renewal as we speak, and it's going to be on a trial basis, okay, Giraffe? But there is no definite answer because there is no such regulation addressing the renewal of the digital nomad visa. And this kind of uncertainty is I would say is a hallmark, or it's something typical of not only the Brazilian immigration but pretty much most immigration systems, right? When you look at the United States immigration system, and when you try to answer something with a certain degree of certainty, it is impressive how many bodies of law or how many sources of regulation or decisions, courts like deciding on how to interpret the existing regulation are out there, right? So even attorneys in the U.S., they have a very hard time to find definite answers for many of such questions. Okay, so Giraffe, unfortunately, no certain answer. Our strategy here at the firm, it has been, listen, if you have something better, such as the real estate investment track, go for it. Otherwise, try the digital nomad visa again. All right, Cooper Giraffe, follow-up question. If, let's say, I purchase a property for 700,000 reais in Fortaleza, would it be fair to assume that after paying for all the fees, including lawyer costs, would it be around 1 million reais? Well, that's, like usually in closing costs, you're going to have something around 5%. And for, the lawyer fees, you would have an additional 5%. So altogether, we're talking about 70,000 reais, okay? If you consider, I don't know, like if you are currently in Fortaleza, but if you need to travel for closing, if you have, additional costs in legalizing documents, and whatever is not being considered as closing costs or attorney fees, let's round this up to 100,000. So I would say that 800 should be a good number for you to work with. Okay, so you don't need to go as far as 1 million reais. I would say 800,000 reais would be enough for you to buy a property in Fortaleza and to secure the real estate investment, visa or residency. All right, another question here from our offline backlog. Can you please confirm we don't need a visa to visit Brazil if we are from the United States? We know about the January the 10th deadline for the visa requirement to kick in. Someone said it was postponed. Can you please confirm? Yes, that's correct. That's actually the third date that we had for the visa requirement to kick in for U.S. citizens, Canadian citizens, and Australians. And it hasn't happened, just like, for the prior two dates. The first one, if I'm not mistaken, was around May of 2023. It was after the new administration took place, but then they postponed. To October the 10th. And on before, I think it was in September, they postponed to January the 10th. And just like that, in November, or it was December, yeah, it was shortly before. It was shortly before. It was, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know the exact date, but the point is, even the January the 10th date, it was postponed again to April the 10th of 2024. And as we speak, the Brazilian Congress is trying to pass a law to avoid President Lula to continue chasing U.S. citizens to try to enforce a visa against U.S. citizens, right? The Brazilian federal administration reasoning is that, the visa waiver has not resulted in the increase that was being expected, and therefore the waiver should be voided, right? Anyhow, the truth is, there was an increase in visits from U.S. citizens. So there was an increase, but the reasoning from the Brazilian administration is the increase was not as much as expected, right? It is more like an ideological take, because the federal administration says, the Brazilian immigration should be based on reciprocity, meaning that if the U.S. is asking Brazilians to have a visa, Brazil should ask U.S. citizens to have a visa as well, right? Of course, everybody knows it is a pretty different situation. Like, everybody wants to go to the U.S., so many Brazilians end up traveling over there saying that they're going to visit Disney, and they end up staying in the country for good. That could be the case for some U.S. citizens, but I would guess the vast majority of U.S. citizens are not going to Brazil, let's say, to ignore the immigration laws, right? So there is a certain difference in terms of realities. But the objective take on that is that the Brazilian Congress is trying to pass a law to avoid the Brazilian federal administration to continue chasing U.S. citizens to get a visa to travel to Brazil. Okay. All right. We have one more question from Cooper Giraffe. Thank you for the response. You're very welcome. Thank you for participating in our live. However, would purchasing a property that's worth higher would increase the chances of getting accepted, or would 700 suffice? Yeah, so I don't think there is such reasoning like, well, if he's buying more, we're going to give him a priority in terms of getting the residency. As long as you do meet the requirements, they should give you the residency, right? There are reasons for why people are not going to get the residency. I'm going to give you 3 examples just to illustrate, okay? The first one, if you buy a bad title property, right? If you buy a property, when you're going to buy, the seller says, well, I have all the paperwork, and they may have a bunch of paperwork, but if there is no legal title, this property is not going to qualify for the residency, right? Another point, like, there should be a construction. So if you're buying a house, but the house is not recorded in the deed, from the immigration perspective, it's just like you're buying bare land, and bare land is not going to qualify. Okay, so then you don't get the visa. Let's say if you're sending the money through like secondary channels, right? Like you're sending a bunch of remittances over TransferWise, which nowadays is Wise. You sent a bunch of transfers, and this type of transfer is not going to give you the paperwork that the Brazilian immigration is going to require for your application, and therefore you're not going to get the investment residency, right? So there are about 10 to 12 different factors that could lead you to not get the investment residency, okay? But if you buy, the minimum required is 700,000, and you follow every single requirement, you should get the residency. If you buy 1 million, you should get the residency in the same way, okay? So you don't need to worry about going, overboard. There would be more a concern like if you are buying 700, but in the contract there is some confusion about the taxes, about furniture. Okay, that's another reason why your application could be denied. Maybe they look at the contract and there is furniture mentioned, and they could say, you know what, you're paying 700,000, but maybe furniture is going to be 50,000 out of the 700, and therefore you're just buying a 650,000 property and not a 700, and therefore they could potentially deny your residency, right? So from this perspective, if there is some confusion in terms of the price components, maybe you could increase it to 750 or to 800, just to have this complete peace of mind. But when you're working with a qualified law firm, they are going to do this analysis for you. And if there is such concern, they are going to address before you get to the point in which you are signing a contract. That's a pretty important point. Some people will come to us after they signed a contract. After you signed a contract, like we cannot change the specifics of the deal anymore, right? So if the residency is something important to you, you should never sign an agreement before you have this agreement reviewed by the same attorney or law firm that's going to assist you with the residency application. Because again, once you sign this agreement, we can go back and say, you know what, like there was a mistake. If we have, this transaction as per the contract, it's not going to work for our client. At that moment in point, like you are stuck with the terms, right? So again, if you're going to pursue residency, make sure to have legal assistance before you sign a contract. Right, Captain Morgan, if you get divorced in Brazil, does the judge look at your assets in the USA or just Brazil? Yeah. So there are a couple of perspectives to this answer, Captain Morgan. The first one is from a legal perspective, right? Like it doesn't matter where your assets are. Your assets should be considered for the divorce, okay? Both a marriage or a divorce is not restricted to a certain country. So from a legal perspective, and that's the same thing for the US, right? And I would guess, maybe I don't know all the legal systems in the world, but I would say that's a pretty common approach, right? For legal systems to consider, listen, if you marry, you married everywhere. If you divorce, you divorced everywhere. There may be some need of legalization of, paperwork for those things to get properly recorded in different places. But nobody's going to say, well, I'm just married in Brazil or I'm just divorced in Brazil. So from the legal perspective, it's pretty settled that if you are divorcing in Brazil, your worldwide assets should be on the table, okay? And of course, there are other specifics to be considered, right? Like, when you married, I would assume you had personal assets. So in theory, the personal assets should not be common property because you owned the assets prior to the marriage, right? So even if the Brazilian judge is going to look at your global assets, whatever you had prior to the marriage, it should be personal property as long as you married, like under a separation of assets type of asset regime. Like I have a client we working with, like they're buying property in Brazil together, like the gentleman, he's from the US, the wife, she's from Brazil, and they married under a comunhão universal de bens, which pretty much says they are sharing everything that they have, right? But so if you marry under this very particular asset regime, even personal property from prior to marriage is going to be shared, right? But that's something very extreme and extremely rare, okay? They probably know why they chose that marriage regime, but that's very unusual. Usually people in Brazil, they are going to marry under the comunhão parcial de bens, which means, like in general, that whatever it's from prior to marriage is going to remain, personal property. Whatever it's acquired during the course of the marriage is going to be considered common property, right? And again, during the potential a divorce, the judge is going to look at the assets acquired during the course of the marriage, not only in Brazil, but abroad as well. Because again, the marriage does not have boundaries, right? Like the marriage is universal. And this is a concept in every single country. It's not like Brazil trying to, play gotcha with foreign citizens. That's a pretty universal concept. Now, I said that there were like two different perspectives to this answer. The first one is like what the law says, these legal aspects. The second one is like of a more practical take, and it means that like for the Brazilian legal system, it's not exactly easy for like lawyers, for spouses, and for the judges to see what there is abroad, right? So it's also a matter of the divorcing spouse, the Brazilian party, to be able to find out about your assets, right? So maybe your Brazilian spouse has access to a list of properties that you bought during the course of the marriage. And if that's the case, guess what? All of those properties, they are going to be on the table, right? However, if the Brazilian spouse has no notice of properties that you acquired during the course of the marriage, then maybe there's not going to be even an inquiry in terms of assets abroad, right? So that's a more practical aspect of the divorce involving a Brazilian and a foreign citizen. Okay, DB Hodler. Welcome, GB. Welcome back. Once I get residency, what is the process to get a Brazil driver's license? So once you get the residency, you're going to get the RNM card. Okay, if you just type RNM, I as in River, N as in Nancy, M as in Mary, card. In Brazil, you're going to see a bunch of pictures of this card. And this card, it's the equivalent to a Brazilian ID card. Okay, with this Brazilian ID card, you are able to apply for a driver license just like any other Brazilian, right? So the beauty of the residency is that you get the RNM card, and the RNM card is the key to getting access to many things that us, Brazilians have access on a daily basis, such as the Brazil driver's license. Okay, so you got the residency. You wait for the RNM card to be printed and made available for you to pick up at the Brazilian Federal Police. You got the card, and you can basically go to one of the Poupa Tempo. Poupa Tempo is a kind of station, and these stations, they are pretty common in major cities like São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Florianópolis, Fortaleza, and they are going to concentrate a number of public departments so you can access different services in a single location, right? The name is Poupa Tempo. I'm going to write down, name of the place is Poupa Tempo, okay? And Poupa Tempo means like, a time saver, right? So the idea is like you don't need to go to different places to get different things. You could get the driver license in the Poupa Tempo using the RNM. Of course, Brazil is Brazil. Red tape and bureaucracy are hallmarks of our culture. They are not going to be satisfied with just the RNM. They are going to ask you for a bunch of additional things, right? You're going to need a CPF, a tax ID. You're going to need a proof of address, a bunch of declarations. You're going to need to pay fees. So, but the key element for your driver license application is the RNM. And the good news is that you're going to be entitled to it. So after some struggling to get all the requirements in place, you're going to get the driver license. All right. Cooper Giraffe, since creating a power of attorney is easier in Brazil when compared to abroad, So should it be advisable that someone travels to Brazil first before purchasing the property to create a power of attorney? Yes, that's a possibility, right? Now, if you're gonna travel first to get a power of attorney, maybe you could just travel for the closing, okay? Because the heavy red tape is gonna be at the moment of closing. That's when you would need, in theory, a power of attorney. But to sign a contract, you could sign from anywhere in the board. Nobody's gonna ask you a power of attorney for the contracting stage. Okay, so in Brazil we use some signature platforms such as DocuSign. There is ClickSign, and they make it very easy for you to sign from abroad, right? So again, for the contract, for the purchase agreement, you don't need to be in Brazil. For the closing, our usual recommendation is, skip on the power of attorney and just show up for the closing in person, right? There are some concerns in terms of the money changing hands. Like, we like to have our closings always in person. In Brazil, it's becoming more common for remote closings. But our concern is that if the closing is remote, how can you assure that the person is going to actually attend the closing and maybe not to just hang up once the money is in their bank account? If the person is sitting on a table and then the money is going to be transferred to their account, they are at the registry already, right? It's much more difficult for this person to basically just leave at the registry without signing the deed of sale. So that's why our standard is for closings to always be in person. And in our contract, we have a specific clause for the parties to waive their rights for a remote closing. Because once they waive their rights for a remote closing, we make sure that both the sellers and the buyer, they are going to be in person at the registry, right? Like minimizing dramatically the chances of a non-performance. All right, we have Emma. Emma, if someone is married but not legally divorced, just separated from the spouse, can still stay in Brazil with common law partner and can get residency in Brazil? Or married but not legally divorced, just separated from the spouse. So there are going to be two components to this answer, Emma. The first one is like from the immigration perspective. Let's say if the immigration doesn't know that you married somewhere else, from the immigration perspective, it's going to work just like you are, in a common law marriage. In Portuguese, we call união estável, for those who don't know, right? I'm going to write over here, common law marriage in Brazil. It's known as união estável. Right, it's in the chat window. Okay, so again, if the immigration doesn't know that you married someone else, they're going to look at the união estável and then they're going to give you the benefit, right? You get the residency, everything goes well. However, for you to get the união estável, right, the usual way is for you to have a specific act done in the registry, right? You go to a registry that's called cartório de notas, and you're going to file like a public declaration that you are living under a união estável or a common law marriage. It's a public document. It's done like with witnesses, and it's like signed by the registry main officer, right? So this is a public document, and if you are misrepresenting that you are divorced, right, or that you're single and you're not, that would be a crime, right? Punishable by up to 5 years of jail. And I like to tell my clients, particularly in our consultations, like in Brazil, there is so much room for people to have behaviors that are punishable as a crime, but at the end of the day, they are not punished. But when you have a foreign citizen, is a different take, right? Like it makes like better news headlines, right? So I would strongly recommend you to avoid that route because, again, there is a chance you would get the benefit, but if let's say the person with whom you are getting the união estável done, if this person knows that you are not really divorced, and then you have a fight with this person could tell the police, right? Like they could make a call, like an anonymous call, and say, listen, this person, she wrote like a união estável escritura, but she's actually married someone else, somewhere else. And that would be enough for an investigation to start and eventually get you to a situation in which you're going to be criminally prosecuted, right? So I don't advise on the route at all. Okay, try to avoid legal trouble in Brazil. I know sometimes, because of so many crazy things you see in the Brazilian society, it gives you this impression that nothing really happens to people. But again, because you're a foreign citizen, maybe this is going to be getting better news headlines, and then your case is going to be one that people are going to actually pursue. While there is, maybe unfortunately there is like a robbery, a homicide case somewhere else. Nobody's going to be really paying much attention to that, but they're going to be paying attention to your case because you are a foreign citizen, all right? That's a possibility. So that's my take on it. Cooper Giraffe, after closing, would I then have it to travel back to my home country to go to the Brazilian embassy and then get the stamp, or could it be done in Brazil without going back home? Yeah, you must, the residency, this particular residency, you must travel abroad to get the stamping, okay? Like we tried, we tried to reason with Brazilian immigration. This is pretty settled. There was never an exception. For many visas and residencies and procedures, like we see some level of exception. For this one, we never saw an exception, okay? You get the residency, the entire process is done in Brazil until the moment in which your residency is approved, right? It gets to a point in which your application for residency is approved and published at the Brazil official Diário Oficial, right? The Brazilian official newspaper. Your name is printed over there. The type of residency is described. There is a number for your case. So it's very public. It's something that you can even search online. It's going to show up on Google, right? It's pretty interesting. After that moment, right? Like whoever is handling your residency, they're going to need to send your files to a consulate of your choice. And of course, this consulate must be connected to you somehow. You cannot just pick any consulate because they are going to ask you for a proof of residency in the jurisdiction of that consulate. Most commonly, it's going to be a consulate, right? Like an embassy is actually an exception. So if you are in the US, you're not going to go to a Brazilian embassy. You're going to go to a Brazilian consulate. It could be in Houston. It could be in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, Atlanta, New York, right? But if you are in the Arab Emirates, right, in the UAE, there we don't have a consulate. We have an embassy. So it's more like an exception when you go to a Brazilian embassy. So whoever is handling your process, they're going to send all the paperwork to that consulate, and you must make sure that you have a proof of residency in the jurisdiction of the consulate. So if you live in Atlanta, you should have like in Atlanta, a Georgia driving license, right? And then we send the paperwork to that particular consulate. They're going to review. They're going to give a temp. Then you must schedule basically an interview for the visa with the consulate. And then on the day that you attended the interview, they're going to have your entire file in front of them. And it's going to be pretty much like reviewing birth certificate, reviewing your passport, asking you a couple of questions like, did you buy this property? How much you paid for? Some final checks in terms of the if the transaction was legitimate or not, and then they are going to give you the residency on spot. Okay, so yes, you must go back. You must go back to your country of origin, and after that, you have like usually between 30 to 90 days. We like to work with the 30 days timeline to go back to Brazil again to register with the Brazilian Federal, and this time as a resident of Brazil. Okay, Copper Giraffe. So yes, unfortunately, there is no workaround. You gotta go back to your country of origin and then come back to Brazil again. Okay. Captain Morgan, if you live in Brazil half of the year, do you need to pay tax for income from investment properties in the USA? So, Captain Morgan, there are probably 4 or 5 different triggers for you to become a tax resident. In Brazil, a couple of them which are related to the things that we are discussing today. They are going to be if you obtain like the legal residency, right? It could be the real estate investment residency. It could be the marriage-based permanent residency, okay? It could be the parental-based permanent residency. Any of the permanent residencies, they are going to automatically mean that you are a tax resident. So it doesn't matter if you're going to be in Brazil for a day, for 5 days, for half the year, or for the full year, you are a tax resident. The second approach, right, I'm talking about the two most common ones. The second approach is going to be time-based, and the time-based goes like this. They are going to look at a moving 12-month period of time, right? So we're not talking about January the 1st to December the 31st. They're talking about a moving 12-month period of time. And if within that 12-month period of time, you've been in Brazil for over 183 days, then you are also a tax resident, okay? So that's probably the answer that better connects to your question. If you're going to be in Brazil for 183 days per year, every year, you're not a tax resident, okay? If you add a single day to your stay, then yes, you are a tax resident. Okay, Captain Morgan? I hope this helps. All right, Cooper Giraffe, if the process takes longer than the time I'm allowed to stay in Brazil visa-free, would I have to, let's say, go to Argentina for 1 day, or is it possible to overstay until the application is approved? Yes, our interpretation is that you can stay in Brazil for as long as your application is being reviewed, okay? There is legal language from Brazilian law supporting that understanding, and that's that's what we provide to our clients. We usually say, listen, you're better off remaining in Brazil quiet until your application is approved. But we have some clients, they have really busy lives, they need to travel around. So we prepare a package so they can travel around and still return to Brazil, even during the processing of an application, right? Like we prepare a pretty robust paperwork for them to show at the time of entry back into Brazil. We share our direct phone number, so if they have like a difficult customs agent, they can call us over the phone. And we've been able to pull this off, like for our clients so far, we never had an exception. So in addition, right, and I'm not saying that's going to be the case for you, I'm talking about our clients, right, who are being represented by a law firm. They can not only remain in the country, not overstaying, because overstaying would mean like that you are legally overstaying and you would be fined, but it means they are actually staying legally in addition to the allowed waiver, right? Like, I mean, U.S. citizens, they come to the U.S. not under any visa. They come to the U.S. nowadays under a waiver. They have 90 days. Okay, it's 90 days. It's not 180. Like we see this conversation all the time. Well, I have 180 days to stay in Brazil. No, you have 90 days. The Brazilian immigration may give you an extension for an additional 90, which was basically a rubber stamping procedure until last year. This is changing as we speak. So it's important for you guys to understand this 90 days is not 180. Maybe you're going to get the extension, maybe you're not going to get. So let's say it is 90 days. But once you file an application, in our interpretation, you have the right to remain in the country for as long as the application takes to be reviewed. All right, we have a follow-up question from Emma. If you tell Brazilian immigration that I'm legally married but not divorced, yet just separated from your spouse, right? Listen, like if you're not divorced, you are married, right? Okay, so I think the Brazilian immigration would not accept such situation, okay? Or, I mean, even if you try to get the união estável done at a registry, if you tell the registry, well, I'm not divorced, but I'm separated, I want to get into a união estável, I think the registry, most probably than not, would say, well, I'm not going to do your união estável because that's not allowed by our legal system, okay? So let's say you don't get the união estável document done, like you could try to work with secondary evidences of the união estável, such as, like you have a lease in both names, you have, for instance, bills showing both names, right? You have a bunch of evidence of a união estável. As long as you don't lie that you are divorced, since you are just separated, I mean, you could still take a shot at it, right? Like I think that the Brazilian immigration would have the same type of reaction as the registry. They would say, well, maybe you should first divorce and then I'm going to accept your união estável claim, right? I think this would be the most probable outcome, but I could also see maybe a 5% chance that the Brazilian immigration is going to overlook this thing and could get you approved, right? So a pretty wild guess, I would say 95% chance you're not going to get it, 5% chance you're going to get it. All right, Emma? I hope that would help with your planning. Cooper Giraffe, thank you for the response. God bless. Thank you, Cooper Giraffe. Always interesting questions. If it wasn't for people like you, we wouldn't have a live stream, right? Like a live stream involves like, interaction and your participation is much appreciated. Till divorce process is completed outside of Brazil, they allow me to stay in Brazil on a temporary basis. Got it. All right, so now I see you're trying to find a way to stay in Brazil on a temporary basis until you are able to figure this out, right? Well, I would recommend you to secure something like the digital nomad visa. If you are in the process of getting the divorce concluded, you get the digital nomad visa right there. You're gonna have a full year of stay in Brazil, headache-free. You don't need to lie. You don't need to beg the immigration for letting you stay in Brazil. You have a full year, and if you by chance your divorce takes longer than a year, then in this case, you could even potentially renew your digital nomad visa and get an additional year. And hopefully in a couple of years, you are free to get the união estável. And as long as this thing is legit, you have the documents, you're gonna get your permanent residency. All right, Emma? Thanks, absolutely, Emma. You're pretty welcome. Okay, very happy to have you guys here in our live stream. Let's see if we have any other questions. All right, so you said there are many instances of fraud in the northeast of the country. How do we avoid such problems in the first place? Like, do we need to hire you? Well, listen, if you hire us, of course, we're going to be vetting the prospective transactions as they speak. But even if you are in the market, just like trying to see the properties around, a recommendation I give you is to make crystal clear to the realtor that you are not open for transactions that are not like 100% correct. Okay, I don't know a better way of saying that, but I think you need to convey this idea to the realtor that you're not willing to play games. You're not willing to play games when buying properties in Brazil. Okay, because realtors, like, they are going to have all types of clients. Many of their clients, they are not really concerned. They are willing to run some risks in exchange for a better price, or maybe their clients are doing crazy stuff by themselves, or themselves. You know what I mean? So the realtor has this kind of impression that people are actually open to situations that are not quite straight. So one way I have to convey to some real estate agencies that work with us on a regular basis, particularly in Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo, is like this. Listen, if you want my firm to share your name with our clients, you're not going to present any shady transaction to my clients, right? If you know that the seller is actually, a straw person, that the seller is actually someone else, if you know that the seller is trying to perpetrate, frauds against creditors, if you know that there is a probate going on, and the heirs are trying to sell this property even before the probate is over, don't show those properties to my clients. Otherwise, I'm not going to share your name again, right? So we kind of educate the realtors and real estate agencies that, for our clients, they should filter the properties, and they are going to only present properties that are going to allow a safe and straightforward transaction, right? Because otherwise, you may very well not get the residency that you are, that you so badly need, right? Like, I mean, sometimes you buy the property just because you needed the residency, because you wanted the residency. So if you're buying a property entangled in a probate, guess what? The property is not going to qualify for the residency, right? Like, this could qualify, I don't know, a couple of years down the road, but I guess you don't want to wait for a couple of years down the road. You want to as soon as possible, right? So I think that conveying very clearly to the realtor or real estate agency that they should filter the properties and only present properties that are not going to be entangled in some type of nonsense would be pretty helpful for you in the shopping stage. Okay, I hope it makes sense. All right, Emma, we are expecting a birth of a baby in Brazil. That's great, Emma. So actually, there is another road for you. There is another option for you as a parent. As a parent of a Brazilian citizen, you can apply without any issues, right? So you don't actually need, the União Estável or the common law marriage route, right? You can basically just forget this path, and you can apply based on the parenting of a Brazilian citizen. So once you are with your baby, that's going to be, God bless, healthy, and is going to born as a Brazilian, okay? And that's automatically, like, you don't need to pick a nationality. The child is going to born as a Brazilian. The hospital automatically is going to issue a birth certificate for the child. The birth certificate showing your name as a parent is going to be your main element for your application for permanent residency in Brazil. Okay, so that's a much better route than the União Estável. Okay, guaranteed. Like, parenting of a Brazilian citizen is a great route for you to secure permanent residency in Brazil. We're so glad we had this conversation, Emma, because now you have a much better route. Don't need to worry about divorce. Don't need to worry about união estável. You have a better route for you now, okay? All right, so we are approaching the final minutes of our live stream. Let's see if we have any other questions here from our participants. Otherwise, we're going to take one more question from our offline backlog. Let's give a minute to see if anyone has an additional question. All right. Okay. So, question from our offline backlog: where should I buy my property? I love the northeast of Brazil, but I think that Rio de Janeiro it's a safer market if I decided to sell the property in the future. Okay. Yeah. So we're talking about two very different markets, right? Like I mean, Rio de Janeiro, as I like to say here in our meetings. Rio de Janeiro is like one of the capitals of the world, right? So if you think about Rio de Janeiro, is at the same level as New York, Paris, Tokyo, like the really, like the most well-known or most famous or most interesting cities on earth, I believe. So Rio de Janeiro, it's always a very safe market, particularly if you're thinking that you may want to sell this property in the future. I think that's a valid concern. Most of the time, it's going to be easier for you to buy a property in Brazil than actually sell this property in the future, okay? And if you buy potentially a high amount property in a location that's not really in a central location, it may be difficult for you to find buyers, right? I always mention like there was a couple of consulting clients. They never really had any more meaningful long-term work with us, but they had a couple of consultations. They built a couple of really high-end houses in the countryside of the state of Rio de Janeiro. Okay, so it wasn't in Rio de Janeiro city; it was in the countryside of Rio de Janeiro state. They bought probably for, I don't know, they bought, I think, the land for, it could be roughly, I don't recall, 500,000 US dollars. And they built massive houses with, the best materials you could think of, and even brought like furniture from abroad. I mean, those houses, they were like the type of house you would see in a magazine, right? So they were really outstanding houses. And they were trying to sell those houses roughly for $1 million each, right? Which by US standards is not like a huge amount of money, but they were trying to sell those houses, I think, for over 5 years, right? And they couldn't find a way to sell the properties, they were not even trying to get a profit. Like they kind of had tracked how much money they put into the deal, and they couldn't even recover, I don't know, like 80% of the monies they spent on that. So the point here is like if they bought like, apartments in Copacabana, right? Apartments in Ipanema, apartments in Leblon, apartments in Gávea, apartments in Lagoa, right? Apartments in any of those pretty well-known neighborhoods in Rio de Janeiro city, they would have actually sold their properties at a profit, okay? But because they chose unusual locations for their investments, they were in such a bad spot, okay? So here, the point is like what you're trying to accomplish with your purchase. Are you buying, to secure residency? Are you buying to have a vacation home, like for once or twice a year in Brazil? And are you concerned that you're going to be selling this property in the near future? How much money you're going to be spending? So all of these factors, they should be taken into consideration when deciding on the spot. Okay, feel free to schedule a consultation. I think it is worth to go through these different locations, and then we can better understand the reasons for you to buy the property and advise you on the best location possible. All right, I want to thank everyone for your participation. We are getting to an end. We're going to have another live stream as usual on Sunday. Okay, so on Sunday, if you want to go right now to our channel. There is a button, notify me, so you don't need to keep that in your head. Once we start the live stream on Sunday, you're going to get a message from YouTube, and we're going to meet again. You guys have a good rest of your day, and see you again on Sunday.